This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. As you know, I'm proud to say that I'm from Louisiana. I don't live there now. I miss home. I miss my family down there many days. But I have fond memories of my childhood and early adulthood down there. I learned a lot. The state taught me a lot. The environment taught me a lot down there, particularly when it came to being a death investigator. Nature's funny that way. It can teach you things about life, even in the midst of horrible circumstances when you're observing all that remains relative to death. It's a harsh environment, just like, say, a jungle. A lot of humidity. Everything seems like it's wet, because it is most of the time. And it seems that it consumes everything around it, whether it's vines or trees or low-growth scrub or just the animals that live there. Everything over a period of time bends its knee to nature in those wet environments. Much like the jungle of Guyana, where several decades back, we had a horrible event that occurred, an event that still impacts even our language today. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. But with that in mind, there is now a company out there that wishes to take people on a tour of a location where one of the most disgusting and horrible events in human history took place. I'm talking about the Jonestown Massacre. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I came across something on my news feed the other day that kind of took me aback, and it was the fact that there was an article that appeared in Rolling Stone, and let me see, I think I've got it here at my fingertips. Yeah, this is actually on July the 3rd. Just to give you an idea, the title of this thing is Jonestown Massacre Site, where over 900 people died, opens to tourism. And I'm thinking, oh my Lord, are they actually serious? Are they actually serious? And apparently this is, it's not just, the name of the company is actually called, of all things, Wanderlust. This falls into a group, a category of tourism that's called dark tourism. And even things like, like concentration camps are part of this world. You go to London, and, Jack the Ripper tours have been making the rounds for years and years. In my hometown of New Orleans, one of the big visitations that people always do is they want to go seek out Marie Laveau's grave.
Really?
The voodoo queen, of New Orleans. They even had the album that came out back. I mean, the song that came out back in the 50s. But, Marie Laveau she's kind of a character. We're not talking about some kind of disembodied spirit here. We're actually talking about a location where over 900 people went at the urgings of a man who claimed to be a man of God. I'm doing air quotes. And drugged them down there to this location that, I'll put it to you this way. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is one of the locations where the French Foreign Legion goes to do jungle training.
Probably.
Right? That gives you an idea of how hostile this environment is. And these people lost their lives down there, Dave. And now people want to go and tour this location. It's kind of amazing.
I think I have mixed feelings about it, a tourism thing. But if it prevents one person from following a madman into the jungle again,
Yeah.
I guess there could be something good that could come out of it. But like you, I remember the sight of this on the news. I remember the stories of hundreds, and they were almost unbelievable. It's like, because at first it was Congressman Leo Ryan murdered in South America. Nobody knew where Guyana was. I did. Okay. I didn't know where Guyana was.
I didn't.
And I remember hearing about it because I was a kid. Yeah. But I remember hearing about, this congressman was killed, and that was the first thing, because, and that there was a news person, a cameraman who was also killed, and several others were killed. That was what we heard about first. It wasn't the mass suicide that we knew of right off the bat. The first story was Leo Ryan, congressman, murdered, on a fact-finding mission, because the people that were in this village in Jonestown, which we had no idea what it was really, a number of family members from Leo Ryan's home district in Northern California asked him, please. Families had been asking local politicians for help for a long time, and they couldn't get any. Harvey Milk, who was the superintendent of San Francisco or something along those lines, wrote a letter to President Carter in 1977 saying, Jim Jones is a good guy. Leave him alone. You're hearing a bunch of lies from a defector, Yeah. And it was from a man whose son was still there with his wife. He was trying to get him out. And they weren't getting help from local politicians. Leo Ryan decided to go check it out. And he went down there with his aide, and, he was then murdered, and we know the aftermath. So I guess my thinking is, Joe, and I was really curious when you brought this up, because I did some researching on the article that Rolling Stone has, and there are a number of different outlets who have also reported on this dark tourism. And I wonder, I guess you and I look at it because it's contemporary to us. We remember Jonestown. We remember it.
Yeah.
I don't remember the reports of World War II. I wasn't alive then. I didn't hear those. So it's historical for me when I see film being played of the liberation of some of the concentration camps that you can find occasionally, seeing those old war pictures. But Guyana was on our television. I remember seeing the helicopter or news coverage, crews, and seeing what we believe were bodies.
They were bodies. And the thing about it is that these bodies, when you see it from the air, and I remember this day because this is kind of how my brain works relative to the news. We never really saw bodies as children in Vietnam, but we saw those reports every single night. We saw the helos lifting off. They're carrying wounded, or they're bringing in troops, and troops are getting off of the helos. And I remember, because my father was involved in Vietnam and during that period of time. And I don't know if you recall this, because we were both kids during this period of time, but they would like Walter Cronkite, they would put the numbers of dead on the screen, and it was those static old graphic shots that they would use in the news industry. Yeah. And you'd see those every now and then, but it was not really tangible. You know what I'm saying? As a teenager, a young teenager during this period of time, I remember that aerial shot of those bodies. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I sought it out in magazines after that, because I wanted, the thing that you see, we didn't have video back then.
Didn't have the internet like we have it now.
No, we didn't even have VCRs. If you had a VCR, you were very wealthy.
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't have that. And so, and even if you did, you wouldn't have access to the tape of it. So you catch a fleeting glimpse, when it was news at that particular time. But I remember going back and look at those still frames, like in Time Magazine or Life or one of those things, and you couldn't really take the measure of it. In my young brain, I couldn't.
Right.
And so, it was striking that you could get, Dave, I swear, it looked like a lightning bolt had descended from the heavens and everybody just kind of dropped dead right where they were standing, because you had families, you had mamas with their kids. And one of the things that I remember is they're laying abreast, okay, like shoulder to shoulder. And some of these people are laying face down on this hot, and I remember the soil is like this bright red clay and with greenery everywhere. And you'd see parents like huddling with their kids adjacent to them. And you couldn't take the measure. And looking back at those images now, you can see all of those bodies are bloated, every single one of them. And being in that environment, it's not surprising, at all.
That's what I was going to ask you when you first sent me the article, and I'm going, okay, I can't even imagine what's left of Jonestown in Guyana, because I thought the jungle would have swallowed it back up by now. So in order to go in there and to look over what was left, I don't know. I'm curious now as to what's left, because most of it was built out of wood and bamboo and local things they could get. They cut, cleared the land. But just as a quick heads up, it was reported that it was a religious cult, an end of times religious cult led by Jim Jones, pastor, Reverend Jim Jones. That's what they called him.
Yeah.
And that's not actually the truth of the matter if you actually dig into it. And I encourage you to do it from a historical standpoint. Those who fail to remember history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
These madmen exist in every community across America. There is somebody who is leading people astray, and it can be any number of ways. A lot of times God is used as that conduit to lead people astray, because people are looking for something better than what they have. Yeah. Most of us know that you cannot be satisfied by money and things. We're looking for something more. And it is that makes life worth living. It's the more. But the thing is, there's always some con man waiting to take your passionately held belief in helping your fellow man and turning it around and stealing your heart and your life, as it happened in Guyana. This man convinced people that what they were doing was good. He convinced them and then conditioned them. Jim Jones studied. He was not an unlearned person. He knew what he was doing, and he went and made it happen. He made Guyana happen. Of course, they were being run out of Northern California because his cult was being looked into for the damage it was doing to families and people. But he had enough friends in positions of power. And I will tell you, that's one of the biggest fears of my life, is that'll happen again, Joe. If it might have happened already and we just don't know it. But this is the biggest loss of life in our American history, because they were all I guess they were all American citizens. They all came from Northern California. But other than 9/11, this was the biggest loss of life in one day that we'd ever experienced as a country.
And I think that probably Americans, looking back over time, we can look at those horrible images from 9/11 and we can see those buildings come crashing down. We can even see people throwing themselves out of those buildings. But you're talking about thousands of miles away in some isolated jungle where most of us have never even heard of it, where you've got loved ones that have died that are littering the floor of this jungle, so-called utopia down there. Are we doomed to repeat this again? I've had the pleasure of working with some pretty cool cats over the course of my career. And one of the most interesting fellows I think I probably ever came across is a guy named Dr. Bill Eckert. I caught him at the end of his career. Dr. Eckert was a rather renowned forensic pathologist. I came across him because he had done some of his time in New Orleans. He was he was quite the forensic pathologist. Had gone to NYU. I think that he had paused for a period of time to fight in World War II. I'm not really sure. But he had lived this kind of really, really interesting life. And one of the elements of it was that he was involved in some of the examinations involving Jonestown. And I've never been able to purely verify this, but Dr. Eckert had told a group of us at one point in time we were gathered that he went down to Guyana, to Jonestown, at the behest of the State Department to do autopsies. And he had done autopsies down there. And can you imagine doing an outdoor autopsy, Dave, on remains in that kind of hostile environment?
You know what? I'm curious, Joe, because we know the type of atmosphere, weather-wise, that they were dealing with.
Yeah.
And yet you mentioned that you could tell that the bodies were bloated. We've got 900 men, women, and children, 267 children, infants, little kids, and they're all laid out. And I have to wonder, what was it like for those who, because all these bodies have to be identified, right? I mean, everybody, you have to identify who they are, how they died, what killed them. How are you going to, and it wasn't like they came in that night after it happened. It's been days.
I think even by today's standards, to try to get to this location, even the world current context that we live in now, Dave, even if you and I were to, I don't know, I guess we would maybe fly out of Atlanta and wind up going, Lord only knows where. I don't know if we could get a direct flight into Guyana out of Atlanta. We'd probably have to make several connections along the way. But even when you land in the capital, then you have to find a way to get out to this location, because it's truly isolated. And that's what Jones wanted. He wanted to be apart from this. But one of the things that stands out that Dr. Eckert had mentioned to me, and this really struck a chord with me. I've been on the scene of multiple decomposing bodies at one time, and have approached, say, one stands out in mind where I had a bunch of drug dealers that were killed in a van where the windows had been blown out. And the van had been sitting there for months, and no one had discovered the bodies. And so months, literally. And they were, these guys were Mexican nationals, I'll never forget it. And it was in a customized van. It was a really nice van. And they had been shot. And it seems like there were either 4 or 5 bodies all stacked on top of one another in the van. And the windows were blown out. And it was outside of a business park. And a guy had walked around the corner to take a smoke break. And he saw the van and walked over to it. And, it's like, took a couple of steps back because the smell was so bad. When I got there, I remember I got within probably 30 feet of the van, and I caught a whiff at that point in time. I've been around a lot of decomposed bodies. But back to Dr. Eckert, he said he flew in to the location in a Huey helicopter, which, if you don't know what a Huey looks like, think Vietnam. You'll see it. Fortunate Sons playing in the background. All right. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Doors are open on the side. And he said that even at like a 2,000-foot elevation coming in across the top of the jungle, they were like a mile, 2 miles out. He could smell death.
Coming in a mile away and, 1,000, 2,000 feet up in the air and smelling death is not something that most of us can identify with.
In this kind of harsh environment, Dave, and I've stated this before very plainly, but let me kind of reiterate this. Just as with all experiments that you might conduct in a scientific environment, like in chemistry, for instance, heat always speeds things up. Okay. Mm-hmm. You couple that with this intense heat that they would have had in this jungle, not to mention incredibly high levels of humidity as well. And you will see these manifestations on the bodies relative to, let me put it to you this way. In these cases, you will see flies begin to lay eggs on the deceased in this kind of environment, potentially within the hour. Just let that sink in just for a second. Have you ever been at a picnic and you've been bugged, literally bugged by a bug, a fly in your face like this? They're everywhere. And so as the smell begins to kind of rise, if you will, the alarms go off for these flies, and they come in from everywhere. You don't see them. Okay. But all of a sudden they're there. That's another part of this horror show, if you will. With Dr. Eckert, who was one of my mentors, mentioned as he came in on that Huey, he could smell it. But, when he would have landed here, what's really fascinating is that as soon as he made entrance into this area, there would have been swarms and swarms of flies that were everywhere. They're lighting on everybody. And as an old death investigator, that's one of the things that used to actually unnerve me, Dave, about death investigation, because you would have, with decomps in particular, because you would have flies that were feasting on the dead, essentially, and then they would light on you. They would fly into your ears, your nose, your mouth. If you're talking to somebody, you'll have, because they're in this kind of fevered feeding frenzy as they're around there. And it's really disgusting when you think about it. But when you take this and you look at this exponentially, because we're talking about 900 bodies, right?
Right.
You compound the situation with this. It's an absolute and utter nightmare. The bodies in the jungle will not adjust to you. You have to adjust to them, and you still have to do a scientific examination. Despite how horrible this environment is, you still have to make a determination about manner and cause of death in each one of these cases. And here's something kind of fascinating. I was kind of ruminating over this. When you think about this, the methodology that was applied here, the cyanide that these people were subjected to and that were essentially forced to drink, I really wonder what kind of markers they might have seen on the bodies as well, not just what they're looking at toxicology-wise. I wonder, from my perspective, and I hate that I never picked Dr. Eckert's brain about this, but did they do blood draws on every single person there? Okay. And then if they did, were they able to come up with specific levels of toxicity? Because, you can actually have this stuff on board in your system. It's a naturally occurring element and you can actually have it on board, and there are non-lethal levels of it. Okay. But once it hits that lethal level, there's you cannot unspin this thing at that point in time. Unless, of course, you've got the necessary medical means at your disposal. And of course, out in the jungle, you're not going to have that.
And that was not their intent. Their intent was to die, not to find a way to survive.
Yeah. And I've thought about this extensively. Back then, I think that cyanide was probably a bit easier to get your hands on. Remember, we recently did an episode relative to Ann Jett,
right?
And that was it was the ant poisoning that was used.
Using arsenic.
Yeah, arsenic, and so those elements within that particular brand of ant poisoning, that brand still exists, but they don't use arsenic anymore.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's the same thing with cyanide. It may very well have been used because it's used for all manner of things in the industrial world, metallurgy, these sorts of things. And there's short-term exposure with low dosages where people that are mining this stuff. Can you imagine working in a mine and you're subjected to this, where they're mining it out and you're absorbing it through your skin, you're breathing it in, and they get low doses. But if you hit somebody with a high dosage of this stuff, and they're contracting it literally by ingesting it. And what a horrible set of circumstances. You've got people having seizures. You've got people that are having incredible gastrointestinal distress. There's vomiting going on, explosive diarrhea. I know that's horrible to talk about. Pounding headaches. I mean, blinding headaches. You've got rapid heartbeat, profuse sweating, and then eventually seizures and coma. And so, and this happens with these levels. It happens very, very quickly. But my whole point, as I'm kind of holding forth here, my whole point with this is that you still have to, I think that you would dishonor the memory, not just of the victims, but of those victims, but also the victims of the fact-finding commission.
Mm-hmm.
If you did not do a deep dive, they sacrificed their lives here. Yep. Let's try to understand what was the modality of death here. What are we talking? Gunshot wounds? Are they inflicted by someone else? Are they self-inflicted? Is this poisoning? I don't know. For all you know, you might have people that were beaten prior to ingesting this stuff. So there's a lot to pick through. And anytime you do these autopsies, and I've never done an autopsy, obviously, in a jungle. I have done an autopsy in a barn. Matter of fact, I did one in a barn, or assisted with one in a barn. I've done a couple of them in garages at funeral homes because the bodies were so decomposed and it was in an outlying area. You don't have access to the same tools. And when I say tools, I'm talking about things like basic lighting. Mm-hmm. I remember being in a barn and there were people actually, it got close to dusk and there were police officers there and they had flashlights out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There was talk of, shining high beams, into the air. We were able to finish the case, but you do every now and then have to go into these austere environments. Interestingly enough, Dr. Eckert, as an aside, he was actually the person that participated in the exhumation of Joseph Mengele down in South America. Yeah,
to prove that he was who they thought he was, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was, he was always kind of a hero to me. Mm-hmm. He probably worked a bit longer than he should, but a lot of it's all forensic pathologists know. But when you look at a career like his and these other stories, we've lost a lot of that generation of forensic pathologists now, and you and I have talked about that. Those tales have, if you don't keep it up and continue to talk about what these people did, I don't. It's hard for me to imagine a forensic pathologist now going into that kind of environment and working in that austere environment like that. I guess they could, but when you have mass fatalities now, they actually have, you look at DMORT teams, which is the disaster mortuary response teams. They have portable morgues that literally you can cut the ropes on, if you will, and the whole thing kind of deploys, where there's a table there and you've got all of your tools and all of that stuff. So you can go to an event like a plane crash and have everything soup to nuts ready to rock and roll. That's not the way it used to be. It's almost kind of a cowboy mentality, when you think about that. And then you're expected to come up with your scientific findings. And you had to do it in a very, I've used the word austere. You have to do it in kind of a hostile environment. Can you imagine having to do this and fighting flies the entire time and any other kind of nasties that might be emerging out of the jungle? And hey, you never know who's out in the jungle either that might be looking at you as you're going through all of this. I guess looking back through, the veil of time here, people don't understand that that this, they call it an airport. It's a landing strip is essentially what it is, Dave. This thing's like 6 miles from the actual compound at Jonestown. Right. And my thought is that this is an area that you have to find if you're going to facilitate bringing in fixed wing aircraft.
Right.
If you're going to create this, you have to find the ideal location that's absent of any kind of rivers, ravines, or that's a flat area that you can go in and plow down, all of the trees and then scrape this area and make it at least suitable. And it rains so much too. Can you imagine? It'd be a muddy, bloody mess out there.
Right.
It's 6 miles from Jonestown. From there, they're having to, you'd made an interesting point, Dave, about the people that ambushed the party arriving on tractors.
Right.
We don't think about traveling about on tractors,
no.
But tractors many times in this kind of environment, uneven roads, that sort of thing, that's really kind of the only way you're going to get through.
Yeah. And they were, towing a trailer behind them, that's still shocking to me. And I only know that from the video, the NBC News guy, when he fell over, and his camera, you can pick it up where they're shooting from the back of that trailer that's being towed by the tractor. And that's where Congressman Leo Ryan was killed, at that airstrip. You mentioned it, 6 miles from the Jonestown settlement. And because as you were telling me about Eckert going in, and that's still shocking to me, Joe. I can't quite get past being 2 miles out and smelling death. I know the smell of death is a very specific smell, but because of the amount that we heard of in terms of the bodies decomposing, I thought there must have been days and days. But the reality of the situation was, when Leo Ryan was murdered 6 miles away from Jonestown, they had radio traffic going from the Jonestown Temple with Jim Jones to the Port Khartoum, where the airstrip was. And then they had contact with Georgetown, which was 2 days trek up the river. But that's where Jones' son was, and the other basketball players from Jonestown, they were playing in a tournament. And so there was already, the word had gone out that they had this revolutionary suicide. But because they had faked it before, and people had left the camp, they called them deserters. Those who escaped the camp did not immediately believe it was real. They were like, yeah, we've done this before, white nights, and we've done that. And so they did get people out there. That's why Eckert got there right away. They had people there the next day. Within 24 hours, people were on site identifying it. But you had to get everybody there to do the work. And as you mentioned, it's not like it is now. And I didn't think about it, Joe. I wondered what would happen going into 900 people are dead. And we're not talking about the Army. We're not talking about a military action where a lot was going on. These are civilians that took their own lives.
So that everybody understands, the actual capital is Georgetown. And weren't there, I think I heard you mention that there were suicides there as well.
There were. The temple had an office in Georgetown, staffed by Sharon Amos, and because they did a lot of work with the government. Anyway, Sharon Amos was a longtime Jones loyalist, and the night of November 18th, she got a two-way communication from Jonestown telling her to take revenge on the temple's enemies and then commit revolutionary suicide. Now, Sharon Amos had 3 children, a 21-year-old named Leanne, an 11-year-old named Krista, and a 10-year-old son named Martin. When she gets this message from Jonestown to commit revolutionary suicide, she escorts all 3 of her children into a bathroom and then uses a knife to kill Krista and Martin. But when she tries to slice her own throat, she has trouble, and her 21-year-old daughter, Leanne, actually helped Sharon Amos cut her own throat. Once she was dead, Leanne killed herself. There were 3 individuals that were shipped out of Jonestown at the time the mass suicide took place. They were the sons of Jim Jones, Jim Jr., Stephen, and Tim. Those 3 young men actually discovered the bodies of Sharon Amos and her children. That was the shocking end in Georgetown.
It's hard really to fathom this. And look, you and I think we can both agree that people are creatures of free will. You're going to do what you're going to do. You're going to be responsible for the choices you ultimately make. But you had said something that was kind of really penetrating a little while ago. You're thinking about these kids. The kids are not exercising free will. We're not going to go into a developmental lecture here about children and these decisions of accountability and those sorts of things. But when you begin to think about these little kids that are there and they're being subjected to all of this, they're being held against their will. And then you have individuals, the political class in America, that, will blindly support this. And a lot of this with Jones, I think, goes back to the money that was throughout his life, Dave, his life that was handed out. And of course, the one thing, we were talking about flies flies earlier. The one thing politicians are attracted to, just like flies, is money. You put the scent of money in the air, and they'll be attracted to it, and they'll say anything that you want them to say. They're willing to look the other way. I think about. Go ahead.
The part that still affects me and affected me when this happened, being a man of faith, I was troubled by what took place because it was positioned as a man of the cloth, led people astray using the Bible. It's not the truth, and I encourage you to look into that. But it does happen, Joe. There are wolves in sheep's clothing, and I think that's what. All I can tell you is that I'm a Christian, and Jesus did not say follow my followers. He said follow me.
Yeah.
And if you just consider that, I think of that with the Hail Bop comment people. I think of that every time we have David Koresh at Waco. I think of those types of scenarios where people put their trust in a human being that they shouldn't be trusting. You can't trust man. Don't trust him. That's what bothers me to this day. It hurts my heart.
Yeah, it does. And you think about all that's left behind. But here's, I think, probably thinking about this and thinking about what remains, and going back to this Wanderlust company that is talking about laying out this location as a spot for dark tourism. Look, I have to say, okay, as you well know, and I talked about it. We did an episode on the catacombs in France, and look, I can church that up all I want to. Okay, I can say, I went to the catacombs in France as an academic pursuit, and I took photographs while I was down there. And I'm going to show them in my class. Matter of fact, this fall, I'll be using those photographs to talk in my clandestine graves class to talk about, depositing of human remains, skeletal remains. But let's face it, I was a tourist in this world. That is a dark tourism site. The darkness that kind of fell over that landscape all these decades ago now, it was really hard for light to penetrate through that, I think. And still to this day, it still resonates with everyone. There are a lot of other sites around the world, Dave, that people visit. I wonder many times, what's the purpose of going there? Do you know that the Wuhan lab now is a stop for dark tourism?
No,
you've got
Joe.
You've got Chernobyl, Fukushima, Japan.
I didn't know Fukushima. I knew Chernobyl.
Yeah, Auschwitz. Is.
And I think when we talked about that earlier, whether it was when we started or before off mic, I actually see some value in Auschwitz of it being a marker. I don't look at that as a dark tour. I look at that as, if we do not maintain Auschwitz and tell people that there are too many Holocaust deniers, and there will come another strain of people that say 6 million Jews didn't die. There are way too many people that say that out loud, and I'm thinking that's the value in keeping that. But again, is there a true value in keeping a dark tour to Jonestown? I guess there is.
I assume that there is. Yeah. I don't know. I think that it would have to be shaped and formed. I think about Waco, for instance.
Right.
And you have to imagine, Dave, that these many years since Waco, there are people that will drive way out in the country, because it's not actually Waco that it's in. I mean, it's way outside of town.
Right.
You have to be purposed.
Right.
You don't wind up there by accident. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There are people that purpose to go there. And if offered the opportunity, would I go and see it? Maybe so. Yeah, I think that some of it is akin to, you can't turn your eyes away from a car accident when you're stopped in traffic, and you're you're cursing the fact that, you've got a 30-minute delay, but when you get to the point where the accident is and they're using hoses to wash the blood and the debris off of the hot top out there, I don't know about all the rest of you. I'm still looking. I'm looking to see what happened. I want to know. And even after all these years, as many times as I've brushed up against death and borne witness to it, it's still there. Maybe it's just part of our humanity. I don't know. But this is certainly a dark chapter. It's certainly a dark chapter, and I think that it needs to be remembered. It needs to be remembered in the sense that people can be influenced by one individual to do horrific things. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.